Welcome to a special episode of Radio Astronomy, listeners. Since Yuri Gagarin first blasted off into space in 1961, humanity has been pushing the limits of how far and how long we can stay away from the safety of our own planet. One of the people that's been helping with that endeavour is today's guest, Libby Jackson. For over a decade, Libby has been working at the forefront of human spaceflight, including spending 7 years at the European Space Agency's Mission Control Centre for the International Space Station. You might also recognise her from various television shows such as Stargazing Live and Astronauts, Do You Have What It Takes? And she's also written 2 books on the subject, including her latest one, Space Explorers, which is out now. So, Libby, tell us a bit about what is it that you actually do with controlling the International Space Station?
So I used to work in ESA's Mission Control Centre for the Columbus module. And the Columbus module is Europe's part of the International Space Station. So the International Space Station is this wonderful, amazing scientific laboratory up in space that's had astronauts and cosmonauts on it for nearly 20 years now, carrying out fantastic science. And the Columbus module is Europe's little science lab there. So I was sitting in mission control. We were responsible for day-to-day operations. It's really just like you see in the movies. When people used to ask me, what do I do? I said, have you seen Apollo 13? I said, and it's just like that. But it's less glamorous because we weren't sending people all the way to the moon. But we still had problems. We still had things to overcome. What we had to do was keep the science experiments running, look after the crew. When problems came up, we'd have to work out what was what. And me as flight director, I was in charge of that team. But I always say we because it really is a team. There's lots of people there and each have their own role and their own specialities. And I just, a bit like a conductor at the front of an orchestra, just waving my arms and moving everybody in the right direction and bringing everything together and getting it all done.
Have you always had an interest in space exploration? Always.
Ever since I was little. I can't remember not. When I was young, space fascinated me. I'd look up at the stars. I remember trying to spot meteors in the middle of southeast London out a window, probably never saw anything. But it was particularly astronauts and the stories of Apollo, but all those early days in space exploration that really captivated me. Working in mission control, the astronauts and the journeys to the moon. And I would devour all of those stories. And that's what I've done in this book. It's share the stories, not just of history and those early days, but what happens now in a form and in a way that I wish I had when I was 10 or 11. It's all about the fascinating things, the amazing stuff that happens in space. For young people to read.
And as you said, the book is centred around stories and the stories of space exploration. Were there any ones in particular that you remember hearing and that's what inspired you to want to write this book?
The stories I've always known growing up and were fascinated by were things like the moon landing. So I picked out here from Apollo 11 that there was so much of it, but the bit I've really picked out was that descent down to the surface, where you had Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin in this teeny tiny little delicate module on their own, trying to do this thing that no one else has ever done. And then Neil Armstrong looks out the window and goes, oh, that's not where I thought it was going to land. And, cool as a cucumber, just takes manual control, flies over this big boulder field and lands down in the middle of the moon with seconds of fuel remaining. And just that little bit of drama, I think is brilliant and fascinating. And so many people might just know now we've been celebrating the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11 recently. But what really happened there, to me, still blows my mind. And then I carry on a little bit and get into something that I don't think I knew when I was younger, which was in order to get off the moon again, they had to fire their engine and get up. And the button that they needed to press to essentially light the engines to make that happen had broken. And after all this, they've made it there. They've landed, they've gone out, they've done the spacewalk, they've put the suits on, are they going to get home? And it was all because they shoved a felt tip pen in the circuit breaker and allowed them to get back off. So there's so much like that is from Apollo 11. But there were things in there I never knew growing up as well.
I do always like that when you hear about using an everyday object to fix something. Like, I think it was the Apollo 15 rover where one of the fenders fell off, so they just sellotaped it back on with duct tape. And were there any more of those sort of unusual stories, the lesser known stories that you really wanted to highlight and bring out?
One of them that I didn't know when I was growing up, and I've only discovered recently, was a tale that brought together Sally Ride and Svetlana Savitskaya. So Sally Ride was the first US woman in space, but of course she wasn't the first woman in space. That was Valentina Tereshkova. But then even Sally was beaten to space, you could say, because the Soviet Union wanted to trump the American achievements, and Svetlana Savitskaya flew. So these two women both were selected and assigned to their missions and had to go through a whole swirl of media attention that was focused not on the fact that they were humans that were being sent into space to do a really challenging mission, which was what they were asking all the men, but about the fact that they were female and how were they going to do their hair and would they cry in space and just questions that nobody was asking the men. And they say the two of them had to go through all of this. And they met once in their lives. I didn't know this. And the story of how they met is wonderful. And I've told it in the book because it's something out of a spy movie, really. What happened was that Sally, after her flight, was at the International Astronomical Congress. Big, still happens today, big space congress, space conference where lots of people get together. But the US and the Soviet Union were... there was diplomatic tensions because there had been a plane that had shot down that the US were blaming Russian for, and there'd been some Americans very sadly lost their lives. And so Sally was under strict instructions not to talk to anyone from the Soviet Union. And then what happened was she was at this conference, mingling in this room. Someone tapped her on the shoulder. She turned round and saw Svetlana Savitskaya there. And she suddenly, and remembering her orders, she said, no, I can't go. So a whirled on her feet and made her excuses and disappeared off into the crowd. But afterwards, kind of, she thought to herself, that was really rude. And I'd really love to talk to Svetlana. And these two women were the only two women really in the world who had lived through the same thing, who could understand each other. And so she mentioned this to her Hungarian translator. And he said, leave it with me. With a wink and a nod. And then later that evening, Sally, her translator, said to her, you should come to a party at my house. And she went back and she spoke to her husband who she travelled with. Should I go? Should I not go? Said, all right, I'm going to go. And this black car picked her up and whizzed her through the back streets of Budapest, and it was raining, and she says it was like a spy novel or something. She didn't know what was going on, and then they got to this door, and she was sort of ushered into it. She walked up, and her head's going, "What am I doing? What am I doing? Is this a big trap?" And she got up to the top and found herself in a flat that looked just like things she knew from home. It was the Hungarian astronaut's home, and he had pictures on the wall of rocket launches and knickknacks from space. And then a little while later, Svetlana turned up, and they had this amazing evening together. And it was the only time in their whole lives that the two of them met. And that story I had never known before, and finding it out was wonderful for me. And then sharing it in the book for other people to read and to discover. It's given me such joy, really.
And you mentioned there Valentina Tereshkova. She was the first woman to fly in space back in 1963. However, Sally Ride and Svetlana didn't fly until 20 years later in the 1980s. Spaceflight's always been traditionally a bit of a boys' club. Do you think that is changing?
Absolutely. It's changing. And we're seeing now... the recent astronaut selections, the European Space Agency, we're expecting one later this year. We're seeing astronaut selections being gender balanced and diverse, which is absolutely what they should be. But it's taken years to change because there's a whole pipeline of people, and we've got to encourage the world actually to be accepting of everybody doing the things that they want. You still today see marketing pink and blue Lego sets now. You've got pink sets and blue sets, and you walk into shops and the boys' clothes under a boys' sign are the ones with all the rockets and the dinosaurs on, and the girls' ones have all got fairies and unicorns and so on. And we're almost teaching our younger generation at the minute that it's even worse. And we've got to change that. And that's why it's taken so long, even now, to get to gender-balanced astronaut selections. But we're seeing more and more. But it was a real challenge when I wrote the book, because it's a history of human exploration, and it goes right back from the 60s all the way through to today. And I want to show that space is something for everybody, and absolutely it is. But when you're picking stories from the past, I wouldn't say it was a challenge, but it was a privilege to pull out the stories of there. But it was a real sort of discussion and a balance between telling the history as it was, and how do you portray that as something that is welcoming to everyone? And I hope we found the balance that's right in the book. And certainly, the further through history you get, the more stories there are to share and tell. And the forward looking and where we are today, absolutely. It's a thriving industry. It is getting more diverse. There is absolutely more we can do, but it is getting better. And for me, for young people, one of the big messages is this is something for you. And if you want to come and get involved in the industry, do. When I was growing up, it was tough at times as a girl enjoying science and physics. And, I did a physics degree, and there must have been about 10 of us in a class of 200. And one of the things, though, that I have found through my life and through my career is that I haven't generally noticed that it's been a big thing. And that's a sign of change and challenge. And I was younger people can be told there are so many barriers. And I would hate to feel that people are put off because there are barriers. And so it's a real balance. But the basic message is, come do the things you enjoy. And I really hope that this book, encourages people to see that there are lots of different things you can do in space, and it's something for them.
And looking forward to the future at the moment, we've got in the US, NASA are planning on staging their Artemis mission, which will aim to put the first woman on the moon. I love the naming of that, by the way. Artemis, who's the sister of Apollo.
Brilliant.
I thought that was a genius name. But we have these big space exploration targets coming up in the future. What are the ones that particularly are of interest to you and that you can't wait to see?
I cannot wait to see humans on the moon. When I was growing up, these stories that capture me that I've told in the book, they felt like the distant past to me. And I was a child in the 80s, and you read these and it felt so long ago. And actually now I look back and I go, goodness me, the last Apollo moon landing was 72. The last Apollo flight was 75. It was a blink of an eye. Now I'm a grown up and I'm an adult, and I see that. But so I've never seen humans on the moon, and I can't wait to see that. And it really excites me that there's going to be a whole new generation of people much younger than me who see that and see the inspiration. And we're going to get to go back with, 21st century technology and cameras and sound recording. And it's going to blow our minds, because there is such iconic photography and imagery from their times in history. One of the stories in the book is all about that beautiful Apollo 8 Earthrise photograph and how it was taken. It mentions that in there. Apollo 8 was a fantastic mission. And that's brilliant. And it really excites me to think, what are we going to see and what are we going to learn from the science when we go back again in the coming years? And there'll be a whole new chapter of stories and a whole new era in exploration. And I cannot, I pinch myself to think, I'm going to see all of that. It is happening. That really is coming in the next few years.
One of the other big changes that we've got coming up on the horizon is the rise of private spaceflight. So as we're recording this, it's a couple of weeks after Rob Benkin and Doug Hurley returned from the International Space Station on a Crew Dragon. We've got Virgin Galactic, which who are talking about sending people into space finally. Do you think that private spaceflight is on the verge of finally making its mark?
Yeah, definitely. Private spaceflight is there and coming, and it already has made its mark from a non-human perspective. What SpaceX have done, disrupting that market, the cargo that they've been sending to and from the International Space Station, but the Cygnus capsules as well. It's really been there, and it really is shifting the boundaries that are happening in low Earth orbit. At the minute, you can buy a ticket to space. You need incredibly deep pockets. And I don't pretend that it's something for the masses yet. But all innovations and everything have to start somewhere. And you go back in history and you look at aeroplane travel. And that started out as government funded, and the very rich people were doing it. And now, in normal times, and I look forward to it being the case again, everybody is able to buy a ticket somewhere, and it's savable, and it's everyday travel. And I think it's going to be a long time before we see space being everyday travel for people. But I mean it when I say to young people now, I think if you start saving, you could take yourself to space. And when I was young, I would look at Concorde, and it flew overhead over my house every night at 5:00, and would land. I lived in southeast London. And I dreamed that one day I'd get a job and I'd save my money and I'd buy a trip on Concorde. And wouldn't that be an amazing thing to do? And then sadly, there were the accidents, and it retired when I was in my early 20s. And that era of private travel is coming. And now any of us, I think, if we actually start saving, could choose to spend a significant chunk of money, but a chunk of money that is affordable if you really save for it, to go and have that experience of going into space. And what that's going to do and allow us to do, it's going to be absolutely vital for governments if they're going to return to the moon and go on to Mars. Governments can't afford to do everything. And the International Space Station is a real key part of what happens with space exploration, with governments. You need somewhere to test technology. You need somewhere to be your test bench to live and work in space. And the private government enterprises, that's going to be how we'll see onto moon and maybe one day onto Mars.
The International Space Station, as you said, has always been a really important place to test the technologies and also the sort of systems and, logistics of operating in space. Do you think that it's been serving its purpose, or is there still some stuff that we need to work out?
Oh, the International Space Station has served its purpose and tenfold in so many different ways. It has taught us how to live and work in space, 20 years of continuous operation. It's brought international cooperation to the forefront. You've got America, Russia, Europe, Japan, Canada, all working together. And even in the past, and perhaps now, when you see America and Russia sort of really having issues, the little world of space and the International Space Station tends to get ring-fenced away and just left to its own devices, because these challenges are so big that you couldn't do them without international collaboration. And it's done that. It's still discovering science. There's still a lot more science to do, and it's still always going to play a key place that low Earth orbit, whether it's the International Space Station or what comes next in the future. But it's first and foremost an international endeavor. And it was another thing in the book. I really wanted to show how international this world is, that even if it's grown up from Soviet Union and America competing in this space race, it's now become a much more international place with people from all around the world getting involved. And it's one of the lovely things about space.
So do you think, from your experience of actually being on the ground whilst working with the International Space Station, is it pretty much politics free when you're actually working there on the ground? Or is there still some international rivalry?
The crew in space and the teams day to day on the ground, they are all focused on the same thing, which is the mission, keeping the crew safe, keeping the spacecraft flying. And it was glorious in my days in mission control that I would talk to people from Japan, from Russia, from America, and they were all there and we were all part of the same team. It is a political thing. I've since worked in the political arena of it, and undoubtedly behind the scenes there is, like any big program, there's politics and there's negotiation and so on. But everyone is still pulling in that same direction with the same goal. There's this document out there called the Global Exploration Roadmap, which is a real single vision for where the space agencies all around the world are going. And the joy of that document, and the group that puts it together, is the International Space Exploration Coordination Group, I think it's called ISEC. It's worth looking up, because it's not just America, Russia, Canada, Europe, the International Space Station partners. It has China involved. It has the United Arab Emirates. It has Korea. It has people from all around the world, and it's growing. And yeah, you're seeing how space is becoming more and more global, and fostering that collaboration and coordination. And it's politics is always going to be there, but that, to have that single goal, to have everyone looking at that is a lovely thing, particularly at the minute in this kind of world and that we're living in.
And you've been working in the arena of spaceflight for a while now, so you must have had some amazing moments or experiences. Is there anything particularly historic or important personally to you that you remember?
Oh, so many things. I still can't believe I have been lucky enough to forge a career in this thing that I was so interested in growing up, and how that happened. And it is a story in itself. But I think it was because somewhere along the line I learned just to do the things I enjoy, and my parents must have brought me up that way. But there have been many, many special moments. One of them I will never forget was being in the Science Museum the day that Tim Peake blasted off into space. And I was involved in that mission, and the Science Museum was filled with about 3,000 screaming children. And just to see how far we've come from Helen Sharman's flight, which is in the book, all the way through to Tim Peake going into space, to being there, to seeing the excitement on so many people's faces was really an evening I'll never forget. And then the highlight of that I still look back and go, really? I ended up having I did an interview on the balcony sort of for what was going on that evening with Helen Sharman, and it was me and Helen Sharman commentating on Tim Peake arriving at the space station. And I look around and go, how did I get here? How was I the person that I'm talking to Helen and Tim, and how did I end up having this career and having being privileged enough to work in something that I have enjoyed. And my message to anyone, and I hope it comes across in the book still, and in my other book as well, but it's whenever people ask me, how can I do things? What do I do? It's do things you enjoy, because people do them. You'll do them well. You'll enjoy your job, and don't be afraid to have the mad, crazy dreams, because then then you go find something that you go, how did I end up doing this? And it's because you do things you enjoy.
And I think that is a wonderful note to end this podcast on. So, Libby, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to talk to us. I'm certainly excited about the future and learning all about humanity's exploration into space. So thank you very much.
Thank you.